Good evening, and thank you for braving this incredible weather. As you could tell by the number of empty seats, we had much larger registration for this evening's program. The good news is we're actually going to be filming, so this program will go up on our website. So we'll still be able to share the information that's being covered this evening with a much larger audience. But I particularly want to thank all of you for braving the weather and being with us this evening. My name is Chase Rend. I'm the executive director here at the museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here. As I'm sure all of you know, the National Building Museum is the forum for dialogue about the built environment. And tonight's program, DC Stimulated, is a confluence of three critical priorities of this institution. Number one, the museum is located, obviously, in the heart of the nation's capital and has a long history of examining the impact of federal policy on the built environment. This past February, Congress passed, or the President signed, the 2009 American Economic Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which allotted $787 billion to address the deepening economic recession. With this legislation, the administration aims to invest in the country's infrastructure and encourage a more sustainable and energy-efficient future. Our speakers this evening will discuss what impact the stimulus bill is having on this region. Number two, long before Vanity Fair magazine debuted its green issue, the museum has been exploring sustainability in the built environment through our exhibitions and our public forums. We encourage you to visit our latest sustainable exhibition, Green Community, up here on the second floor, which investigates the past, present, and future of green communities. And the exhibition is open through October, so you have no excuses to miss it. The stimulus package aimed to create green-collar jobs, invest in clean energy, and allots billions of dollars for weatherization projects. And tonight, we can all look forward to hearing about the efforts to create a more energy-efficient and green world. Number three, although the museum's mission is national, we have a firm commitment to the Washington, D.C. region, as evidenced by such things as our D.C. Symbol and City exhibition here on the first floor and our long-running D.C. Builds lecture program. The federal government promised that the stimulus package will save or create 171,000 jobs in the District, Virginia, and Maryland over the next 2 years through bridge repair, local highway projects, and efforts to make buildings more energy efficient. Tonight's program will ask if we are on track to meet this goal and if we have the necessary workforce to manage and build our needed infrastructure. Our moderator for this evening will give formal introductions of the panel, but I would like to personally welcome Congressman Connolly, and hopefully soon, Councilmember Brown, and the CEO of the Association of General Contractors, Steve Sandherr, who is also a trustee of this museum. We are honored to have Kojo Nnamdi as tonight's moderator. Kojo Nnamdi is a broadcast presence that is familiar to just about everyone in Washington. I would say everyone in Washington. He is currently host of the Kojo Nnamdi Show, the weekday public affairs program on WAMU FM, 88.5 on your dial, and the very popular Evening Exchange seen on WHUT TV. He was cited for an Excellence in Broadcasting Award by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences in 1993. Kojo can be confrontational but civil, diplomatic but insistent, cerebral but humorous, and opinionated but restrained. Kojo has a reputation for versatility and preparation because of his ability to knowledgeably handle topics as far removed as nuclear non-proliferation policy and basketball playoff matchups. Please welcome Kojo Nnamdi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kojo.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. $787 billion, the American Economic Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and as you just heard, save or create 171,000 jobs in the Washington area. It all sounds so good, but we don't exactly know how it's going to roll out we don't exactly know who will be in charge of what. And that's one of the reasons we're here this evening, to talk to some of the people who are likely to have an influence on exactly how this evolves, and to investigate the kind of short and long-term effects it is likely to have in the Washington region. We are privileged to have three distinguished panelists, two of whom have already arrived, the third of whom presumably is on his way. How we will proceed is that each one of our panelists will make opening remarks for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll have a conversation with the panelists for the next 30 or 35 minutes, and then I'll invite you, members of our audience here, to indicate by raising your hands whether you have questions or comments that you would like our panelists to respond to. Allow me to introduce the two panelists who are here. You have heard them mentioned before, but they are now being formally introduced. Please welcome Congressman Gerald Conolly, Democrat of Virginia. And Steve Sandherr, CEO of the Associated General Contractors of America. We'll start with Congressman Connolly.
Thank you, Kojo. Thank you, Kojo. It's great to be with you all here on this stormy night and to talk about this very important topic. I have to tell you that, as Kojo knows, prior to being elected last November to Congress, I was the chairman of Fairfax County, one of the largest counties in the United States, population-wise, budget-wise, and the largest in Virginia. And I represented 1.1 million people, of course, so being elected to Congress was sort of a step down. And I was reminded of that just the other day. I was invited to a retirement party just down the street at the Ronald Reagan building where AID, part of the State Department, has its headquarters. And a friend of mine was retiring after a number of years at AID. And I, of course, being in Congress, was running late after late votes. And so I entered the wrong entrance of the Ronald Reagan building and had to wind my way through the circuitous way to try to get the right security desk. And finally, breathless, I arrive at the right security desk, and they want to see my picture ID. And then they say, well, you're going to need an escort. We need a name and a phone number to call. I said, well, the name and phone number is the guy who's retiring. I'm sure he's at his party. So they call, and of course, no answer. And I'm really looking at my watch thinking, I'm going to miss this party. And this has been a friend of mine for 40 years. So I finally said, look, I hate to do this, but I'm a member of Congress. Do you think it would be all right if I could go up to the third floor unescorted? And he looks at me and he goes, you're a member? I went, yeah. He said, well, let me make a call. So I can't hear him, but he's very animated. He finally hangs up and goes, no, you need an escort. So I know my place. Let me set the stage, if I may, just a little bit about the stimulus bill. When I got elected in November, and between that and January 6th when we were sworn in, we had 3 different orientation programs for the freshman members of Congress, bipartisan. And we probably met with about 15 leading economists during that time period. And they included economists on the right, like Larry Lindsay, who had been on the Federal Reserve Board under the President Bush 41, and Council of Economic Advisors under President Bush 43. John Zandi, who had been John McCain's economic advisor for the presidential campaign. 2 people on the more left of center, like Barry Bosworth at Brookings. To a person, those 15 economists said, irrespective of their ideological framework, forget about the deficit right now. Focus on stimulating the economy. Why? Because it's about to go right off a cliff, and if it does, you're not talking recession anymore. You are truly talking depression, and it will take a long time to climb back off that cliff. And so we took that very seriously. And sadly, in the House, all of the Republicans chose ultimately not to vote for the stimulus bill. And as you may recall, in the Senate, 3 Republicans, one of whom has since switched parties, decided to hold the balance of power, and ultimately we were able to pass a bill in the Senate as well. There was nothing magic about $787 billion. It needed to be big. It needed to generate jobs. The economist's advice was, I don't even really care what you invest the money in. Invest it in something that will get people working again and reinstill confidence in the consumer. We decided that this bill would be an amalgam of a lot of things we thought needed to be done that would meet those goals, but would meet other longer-term goals as well. And I think we do need to differentiate between a consumable I spend money on and a longer-term investment. We spend money on both, but the latter has a return associated with it. Example, think, if you can, calculate, if you can, the return on the investment of the interstate highway system. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. By the way, the man who carried the bill in the Senate for him to create the interstate highway system was a man named Prescott Bush, a senator from Connecticut at the time. And they decided boldly to make an investment. They justified it under the guise of national security. We needed to allow military vehicles free reign from one end of the country to another. But the truth of the matter is, it created neighborhoods, it created mobility. Think about the return on that initial investment. It wasn't a sunk cost. So we tried to replicate that as much as possible in the stimulus bill. For example, there's $19 billion in that stimulus bill to move the American healthcare system to all electronic record keeping, something we've been talking about for years. That has two benefits to it. It saves a lot of money from the current paper system, and oh, by the way, it will save lives, because the error rate of an electronic record keeping system is going to be far lower than the current system of a lot of files, paper files, and so forth. We invested a lot in the innovative economy, hybrid vehicles, advanced battery research that will help jumpstart the solar industry, wind power, weatherization of homes, the single most efficient thing we can do in terms of energy savings. A lot of infrastructure. Infrastructure has a lot of benefits in terms of immediate job creation, but it also, like the interstate highway system or the metro system here in Washington, imagine, also calculate, what's the return been on the initial investment, whatever it cost, to create the metro system in metropolitan Washington. It revolutionized metropolitan Washington. It infused enormous value into real estate, into retail. The city has been the biggest single beneficiary, but all of the region has benefited from having a metro system. I'm old enough, and I lived here before the metro system was opened. And I've seen the transformative impact that investment has made in our region. By the way, one of the single biggest beneficiaries of that investment has been the federal government itself. A huge percentage of the federal workforce in metropolitan Washington uses Metro every day to get to work. It's hard for us to imagine what we'd do without it. It takes 600,000 cars off the road every day. In other words, if we didn't have it, there'd be an additional 600,000 cars on our roads. Imagine that today. And so it's been an investment that really paid off. There's a lot of money for transit in the economic stimulus plan. Now, I could go, there's money for states, there's money for Medicaid, there's a lot of money, direct money for education, that really came in handy for a lot of states. The combination of Medicaid funding and education funding, we would have been in a real deep trench for a lot of states and a lot of jurisdictions without that funding. That meant that teachers and police and firefighters didn't have to get fired. It meant we could help stabilize a lot of localities while they try to adjust and buy some time in this economic situation, which was the most dire we faced in a long, long time. Is it working? I attended a breakfast for a group of us called the New Democrats, sort of a centrist group of pro-business Democrats, with the Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke. I will remind you that Ben Bernanke was an appointee of President George Bush. He's not an appointee of President Obama, not yet. And we point blank asked him, is the stimulus working? And he said, as an economist, wearing his hat as chairman of the Federal Reserve, yes, it is working. In fact, I don't know what we would have done without it. There are clear signs in the economy. Consumer confidence is up, consumer spending is up, durable goods orders are up. Inventories have been drawn so low that it's going to help sooner or later sooner hopefully rather than later, spur additional manufacturing. The housing market is beginning to stabilize. We're seeing sales, albeit at a lower price because the valuation has fallen. And if we can do something about foreclosures, we can help stabilize the housing market because mortgage rates are low. Credit is beginning to flow again in the economy. So we have some early signs that this is working. You notice the unemployment figures. Now, unemployment is a lagging indicator. It's always the last thing to improve when the recession has ended. And we noticed that we went from a job loss back in January and December of 694,000 to half that this last month. So the rate of unemployment, new unemployment claims has been halved, which means that companies are not laying off as many workers, and we're beginning perhaps to see some areas in the economy where employment is stabilizing and some people are coming back to work, including even in the construction industry. Again, way too early to uncork the champagne, but is it having an impact? Yes, it is. And I can tell you in my district and in Northern Virginia, I can see the effects of the stimulus bill. I had a health clinic that was about to close, served a certain niche of folks who weren't well off enough to be able to just go to any doctor, but weren't poor enough to get totally free medical care. And that's an important niche. And this health clinic was literally had already drawn up the papers to go out of business. They got some money from the stimulus bill. We were able to not only maintain that health clinic in Prince William County, we were able to actually expand services, hire more people, and the good news, they were able to use the stimulus money to leverage other donations. And now they're getting other donations to the clinic that I think will help their long-term stability. Exactly what we had hoped the stimulus would do. You know, everything from helping the police departments, providing homelessness aid, providing neighborhood stabilization aid, and a lot of infrastructure. In Fairfax, we're looking at, for example, the one project President Obama chose to cite as an infrastructure project was actually in my district, and it was the completion of the Fairfax County Parkway near where Fort Belvoir is expanding as part of the base realignment and closure process. And that was the one project he chose to highlight with, in this case, our governor, Governor Kane. And I was very pleased to see that. And the stimulus program is going to complete that missing link that we've been trying to get done for 20 or 25 years. So I think there's a lot of evidence that the stimulus is working and is taking hold. Is it working as fast as we'd like? Well, of course not. I would have liked, a dramatic impact the day after. The stock market is up significantly. It was down around 6,500 points. It's now at 8,800 points. A healthy improvement, but of course, it's below its high of over 14,000 points. So we still have a ways to go. So we're not out of the woods yet. We're not out of the recession yet. We're going to continue to see bad numbers on unemployment for a while as a lagging indicator. But I do think that the stimulus has made a big difference in restoring confidence, in helping credit flow again, and in making some investments in the innovative economy that will pay off in the future. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Connolly. During the course of our conversation, we will attempt to look a little more into the future in terms of the effects of the stimulus package so far. But now let's hear from Steve Sandherr.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Perhaps tonight's weather is a fitting metaphor for the economic conditions that we faced. We have a storm, we have a lot of lightning and thunder and disruption, and hopefully it will clear and the sun will come out and everything will get back to normal. I represent the Associated General Contractors. We're the nation's largest construction trade association. We represent about 33,000 members. We have chapters in every state and in Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. Our members typically do all forms of construction with the exception of single-family homes. So if you need a deck or a driveway or an addition, I'm not the guy to see. The vast majority of our members are small family-owned businesses. They probably Most of them, the vast majority, perform less than $40 or $50 million worth of construction a year, although we have exceptions. If you look locally, firms that you would be familiar with seeing their signs around the region, Davis, Clark, Grunley, those are all members of AGC. We were unabashed supporters of the stimulus package. After the election, when the new administration and the new Congress started talking about ways to get the economy moving again, we were pushing very hard for them to look at investments in infrastructure as being a way to get people back to work. We partnered with George Mason University to do economic studies to demonstrate what the impact that a stimulus package with investment in infrastructure would have on the economy. And what we found was that for every $1 billion that you invest in infrastructure, as Congressman Connolly mentioned, it has a multiplier effect. It brings $3.4 billion into the GDP, and it creates 28,500 jobs. Those aren't all direct construction jobs, but they are jobs with suppliers, equipment dealers, material suppliers, people that work at the local diner near the construction site, hotels, when you have to ship people in to do work. So you have that multiplier effect, and it is, you get a lot of bang for your buck when you invest in infrastructure. So you have that short-term impact, but you also have the long-term impact. And the long-term impact, what we found very gratifying about this was that the administration and Congress recognized that we have been neglecting our infrastructure. We have $2.2 trillion worth of needs at the local, state, and federal level in infrastructure, from schools, roads, bridges, water treatment plants, retrofitting buildings to make them more energy efficient, et cetera. Go down the road, go down the line. And so this, in our view, was a down payment on addressing the infrastructure gap that we have, the investment gap that we have in this country. If you take a look at what we spend, the United States spends less than 2% of our GDP on improving our infrastructure. And you look at our global competitors like China. China is spending over 8% of their GDP on improving their infrastructure. Now, granted, they have a lot farther to go. They didn't have an interstate highway system. And see, Congressman Connolly, you know who the Democratic sponsor of the interstate highway system in the Senate was? Al Gore Sr. So you had a Gore and a Bush pushing for the interstate system. So thankfully they got together on that. Family got together. Those families
See what
got
happens
together on
when
that.
you're bipartisan.
Absolutely, you can accomplish great things.
Right.
So basically, the point is that we're making this down payment. It is going to help us long-term in investing in our infrastructure and improving our capital assets. This program couldn't have come at a more welcome time for the construction industry. Since May of 2008, we have lost 990,000 jobs, almost 1 million jobs in the industry. The unemployment rate right now, in May of 2009, the unemployment rate for the construction industry was over 19%, so it was twice what the national unemployment rate is. The good news is that we are seeing, on an anecdotal basis, we are seeing companies hire back employees, in large part, construction companies, in large part due to the stimulus. If you take a look at the $787 billion package, there's about $145 billion that is investing in our infrastructure. And to put that in a measure of comparison, if you looked at the 2008 appropriations bills and you identified all of the money in the fiscal year 2008 appropriations bills that went for construction, that went for infrastructure spending, and you compared that with what is in the stimulus bill, it's a 133% increase over 2008 appropriations, which means you basically, what we're seeing is we're getting a year and a quarter of additional infrastructure investment in this year on top of what we'll see in the 2009 appropriations. So we see this as an incredible shot in the arm and an incredible opportunity to put people back to work, to improve our economy, to improve our environment, and to get things moving again. And the last thing I would mention about this for now is that, again, this has all been welcome for our industry, because if you take a look at what's happened in the private construction markets, private capital has dried up. They're not building retail, they're not building hospitality, not building commercial office space because of the contraction in the economy. And so there's not a lot of private investment in construction. The thing that I remind my members about all the time is that I would hate to see what our industry would look like without the stimulus, because this has given our industry tremendous hope and a tremendous opportunity to not only keep people on their payrolls, retain workers, but to also hire new ones. Our economist estimates that the infrastructure investment in the stimulus package will allow the construction industry to retain and add 650,000 jobs to our industry this year alone. So that will take a big bite out of the million-dollar jobs that we've lost in the last year in this industry. So with that, I'll stop, and I look forward to the discussion and the questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Good job.
Thank you. I think I'll sit here.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that DC at-large Councilmember Kwame Brown is still on his way. We will start the moderated discussion, and I will lecture him when he arrives. I've known the council member since he was a child, so he's used to being lectured by me. We'll start the discussion anyway, and when he comes, he'll be allowed to make his presentation, which I'm pretty sure will focus on workforce development.
I think we ought to punish him, Kojo. He shouldn't be allowed to make his presentation.
Penalties, huh? We'll have a penalty in place. We'll see what happens. These 171,000 jobs that will either be saved or created here in the Washington area, it is my understanding will begin with what are known as shovel-ready projects. Well, we have shovel-ready projects in a number of jurisdictions in the region. And you mentioned Metro. The Washington region has cooperated. There's the Council of Governments. Tell me, what do you see as the format, if you will, for how we cooperate on the creation of jobs using the stimulus package?
As a region.
As a region.
There are a lot of regional mechanisms for making that happen. Let me take, and remember the importance of technology. So, for example, here in metropolitan Washington, and it's fairly sophisticated and a long tradition of cooperation, we have the Transportation Planning Board that approves lots of projects. And then there are sub-regional groups. In my case, in our region, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which already has a plan through 2030 for projects we've agreed to and we've prioritized, so they're ready to go, but for financing. So this shot in the arm in terms of infrastructure funding we'll be able to take them off the shelf and get them started, because the approval process has already been done by the region. Likewise, we have the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee, which looks at air quality mitigation measures. We're in what's called a non-attainment region here in metropolitan Washington, where our air quality does not meet certain standards set by the EPA. So there are mitigation measures. Again, looking at renewable energies, looking at alternative forms of energies, investing in them with stimulus dollars, does two things. It creates jobs, in a sense, shovel-ready, and helps us with our air quality goals. So we're looking for those multiple hits, and the region is well equipped and well established to be able to do that fairly quickly.
Can we also anticipate that there's likely to be some level of competition between and among jurisdictions in this region?
The allocation of infrastructure dollars was already done at the federal level, so there's no need for states or jurisdictions to really be competing with each other. Likewise, the education money that went directly to school districts and or state capitals was determined on a formula basis that is already used by the federal government. Likewise, community development block grant funding, likewise Medicaid funding. So no, I don't really see a competitive element in the stimulus funding. Other spigots of federal funding in appropriations bills or the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, which is pending, that you will see competition, but not in the stimulus.
Steve?
If I could jump in on this. there's been a lot of observation in the media about the projects going out, and I think it's fair to say that the transportation projects have gone out quicker. And the reason is two reasons. One, as the Congressman mentioned, transportation money goes out on a established formula, and the formula is set every 5 or 6 years when the Surface Transportation Bill is reauthorized. So there already is that mechanism for money to go out to the states, and it was an easy flow. And I think the second reason that you see a lot of the transportation projects happening quicker than some of the building or the water treatment or wastewater projects is that there's a requirement that for the transportation projects that 50% of the money going to the states has to be obligated by the state within 120 days, or else they lose some of their money. And then the other 50% has to be obligated by the end of the year. So state DOTs have an incredible incentive to identify those projects and get them out to bid. And there's one project in particular here in the region that I'd like to point out that is probably going to go out to bid next month or early August. It's a $40 million bridge project. It is the bridge that goes over New York Avenue near the intersection of Florida Avenue. Those of you that are familiar with it, that bridge goes over high voltage electric lines, Metro line and Amtrak line. And I talked to the DDOT engineer who is in charge of this bridge project and asked her, why are you replacing this bridge? It's only about 50 years. And her response was, because of the high voltage lines that go under the bridge, we have no access to inspect it. We don't know what condition this bridge is in. So this is a $40 million project. They'll be able to build it with an access way underneath for future inspectors to go in and check the bridge out and make sure that it's stable. And that $40 million project, which will start probably in August, will put hundreds of people to work.
You know, Kojo, if I may add a little
Sure.
bit, I think it's important to remember that there were real differences between the House and Senate approach on this subject. The House wanted a lot more infrastructure money. I appreciate Steve's commendation of the fact that it's a 133% increase over the appropriation, but we probably would have made it 233 if we'd had our way.
From your lips to God's ears?
Yeah, because we were very persuaded, especially people like me with local government experience, of the value of the infrastructure investment. A, it creates jobs, shovel-ready, stimulates the economy immediately. But B, the long-term return on that investment is also to be considered. I cite three things that were in the House bill that was stripped out of the Senate bill. We had a lot of money in there for school construction. The Senate zeroed it out on the specious argument that never before had the federal government ever built schools at the local level. And I remember giving a talk to our caucus saying, well, that would come as news to my constituents at Mount Vernon High School, built with federal money, and over 2,000 high schools all across the United States built with, guess what, federal money. Secondly, we had $12 billion in there for transit, and the Senate cut that back to $8 billion. Again, my experience is transit systems may take a little bit longer in payout, but the confidence they engender, someone says in your city we're going to build a transit system, all of a sudden credit starts flowing, banks start getting interested, commercial sector starts to revive, people want to make investment. It's an incredible boost to an economy, and oh, by the way, good for greenhouse gas emissions and CO2. The third, and of course, the third thing I mentioned was we would have included a lot more by way of infrastructure. What the Senate did, the three Republicans, was, at the request of a Republican who did not vote for the bill, was to substitute money to finance the avoidance of a whole bunch of folks coming under the umbrella of the alternative minimum tax, which I know that gets complicated, but essentially, if absent any action by the federal Congress, a lot of people would have been subject to the AMT. So they...
$70 billion.
That's right.
Yeah.
They put $70 billion into the bill rather than in infrastructure. Not much of a stimulus, frankly. And ironically, the person who insisted that happen did not vote for the bill, but the three Republicans who controlled the negotiations did it for him. So we had to swallow those three things that may be good things to do, the alternatives, but frankly, we lost some dollars that I think would have been more stimulative. It reminds me, Sam Rayburn, the longtime Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives a long time ago, used to say the Republicans are the opposition, but the U.S. Senate is the enemy.
Well, and if I could add to that, the school construction money, there was $14 billion for K-12 schools, $6 billion for higher ed. It was some of it was made up in conference, as you mentioned. One of the Republican senators conditioned her vote on that being removed. But there are two opportunities to make up for some of that money. One is the governors get about $8.8 billion of discretionary money that they can spend on education and on firehouses and police stations and things like that. And secondly, in the tax portion of the bill, there is an authorization of $11 billion worth of school construction bonds. So while I agree with you, we would have loved to have seen that $20 billion that was in the House bill remain in the final package. It didn't all go away. There are still some opportunities to make some of that up in the near future.
There's another aspect of this that I'd like to focus on, and that is how this Recovery Act and Reinvestment Act will stimulate green building. But before we get to that, I do have to inform our audience about what they already know, and that is that at-large DC Councilmember Kwame Brown has arrived. He's the chairman of the Committee on Economic Development on the City Council, and I'm sure he will apologize for his lateness here this evening. But as I said to you earlier, I've known the council member since he was a child, and as a result, I get to choose what disciplinary action will be taken against him on this occasion. We have allowed each of our panelists, Kwame Brown, about 10 minutes to make an opening statement. Unfortunately, yours will be restricted to 5.
But thank you, Kojo, and it's good to be on the panel and be invited to see my good friend, Congressman Connolly. It's always a pleasure. And clearly, Steve, it's good to see you again. I do apologize for being late. I was on 16th and K, and the lights
Say
went
no
out.
more. 16th and K rush hour.
Now, I must admit, I was already running about 5 minutes late. And it took that long to get here. It was unbelievable. I thought maybe the president was moving, and so I said, okay, that's an excuse. But no, the lights were out downtown. So I do apologize, but this is important. As we look to the green economy, as we look to the reinvestment plan that's come down, it's really just started to, this plan has started to get people focused in areas that may not have been exposed before we went into this financial turmoil here. When you look at just green itself, everyone talks about green. Now we're starting to define what green is. The District of Columbia has passed the Green Buildings Act, which will require a standard for all funded buildings that are funded by the District of Columbia and projects that receive money from the District of Columbia. But it opens up a whole opportunity for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. It is a pipeline for, in terms of employment, in terms of business. I say, Kojo, that we are the environmental capital of the world, right here, through the $6 billion that was going to retrofit government buildings, and just the focus on the amount of dollars that's going to, and the commitment from all sides of the aisle, Congressman, as you would know, no one disagrees that we should not make our government buildings more energy efficient. So when we find that everyone's on the same page of trying to get our government more energy efficient, the question is, this is something that is a new industry that will take place for years and years to come. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I have a sense that, when they're going through high school, this will be an industry that we will look back at and say, wow, look at how far we've come, but more importantly, they would be taking it to the next level. So for those businesses that are located in other states throughout the country, they're looking for the District of Columbia and the K Street, the White House. They're looking for people to set policy and move discussion. So all of those firms, the best-minded green firms in the world, will be here. They will be part of that discussion. The best small businesses and medium-sized businesses that are trying to figure out how do they participate in the economic reward that's going to come out of green, which starts not only in the federal buildings in the states and municipalities all over the country, but really right here in the District of Columbia will be here. which will allow the state of Virginia, as well as hopefully sometime soon the state of the District of Columbia and Maryland, to participate, to be at the forefront of the participation of just the municipalities going green. Now, as it relates to, we can't have the conversation without talking about the opportunity for employment.
Told you he'd talk about workforce development, didn't I?
Employment, and I say that because of someone who has fought hard 4 years ago to get the only architect, engineering, and construction high school built, and the most modernized vocational school in the country. It has, solar panels, it has weatherization, it has an architect wing, an engineering wing, and a construction wing, but it's all focused on green. And the question becomes, how do we not just focus our high schools, but how do we create vocational and green training for adult populations, those 18 through 45 years old, those that are under become better employed, for those that are in a field that no longer has opportunity, such as the financial industry, and now they want to get involved and get training to move forward in the green economy, for those in academics that want to figure out how do they position their graduates to take advantage and be at the forefront of an opportunity that is going to be growth. It is our responsibility as elected officials to push and use as much resources as we can to invest in an infrastructure that currently does not really exist, that will provide people with the opportunity and the skill sets to take advantage, to be able to provide for those families and to be able to move in a whole new area. And I do believe that as we move forward, some will consider green. The definition of green is broad. People may think it's in one area, or 2 areas, or 3 areas, but it is something that's consistent. And I think we have another 12 months to take full advantage of creating the next infrastructure that will then let people see the hope of where we want to go. So I do appreciate it. That was 3 minutes. Mr.
Yeah,
Kojo. Right. I saw you looking at your watch. It was 3 minutes. And as they say, that when you're late, I'm here to really not only have the discussion, but have you be able to interact with the audience. And that's why I want to cut it down from 10 minutes, because many of you have the answers that we need. And we need to encourage more discussion and more dialogue, not just here, but all throughout the country, so we can bring people in, so we can have the best minds to build what I consider something that's going to help my kids breathe safer. It's going to help them live longer, and my kids' kids have an opportunity to say that their maybe great grandfather had an opportunity to start and be part of a movement that helps this planet continue to be clean and safe.
Congressman Connolly, these long-term views run against the short-term political cycle in which you and other elected officials have to operate. You're going to have to run for office every 2 years. Every 2 years, whoever opposes you is going to look at what progress has or has not been made in the moment and say, look, Jerry Connolly says that this American Recovery and Reinvestment Act will do all of this for us, and over the course of the past year, it has only done so much. How do you, as an elected official, balance what you see as the long-term needs of our country and of your particular community and constituency with the short-term necessity of having to run for office against people who are going to be looking at how this works in the short term?
Well, first of all, Kojo, nobody told me about 2 years. Well, I ran as part of a team in November with President Obama and ran on a message of we need to change direction. We need a profound change of direction. We need to save the economy, not just turn it around. And we're going to have to make some tough decisions for the sake of the country. And there's real political risk involved in doing that. And the first folks to experience that risk will be people like me, members of Congress, because of that 2-year thing you talked about. But what did I run for office for if it wasn't to respond to that crisis? To the best of my ability, based on the information and the best information available to me. I wish it had been the kind of bipartisan effort that Steve talked about on the interstate highway system. Sadly, it was not in the House. And I think as a result, what you had was this fissure in which one party bet everything on this working, and another party bet everything hoping it won't. And I'm proud of the vote I cast. I believe that it was absolutely a risk worth taking with President Obama to put people back to work, to give people hope again, to respond to what I thought and continue to believe was a national crisis unrivaled since the Great Depression. And so we had a responsibility as the majority party to respond. I happen to believe the minority party had an equal responsibility, and I think they abrogated that responsibility, but that's a different matter. I'm quite comfortable in the decision I made and would do it again.
Steve Sandherr, it's easy to say that projects that are shovel-ready are going forward at this point, but there are people who say that it may be shovel-ready now, but it does not necessarily take into account our long-term needs. That those who have opposed this, especially those in the Republican Party, has said, look, this is not sustainable. It's going to stimulate the economy maybe in the short term. It may provide jobs in the short term, but it is not sustainable. What gives you and your organization the confidence that this is sustainable?
Well, I think it's correct. In the short term, it does provide an impetus for growth. And at the same time, we are improving capital assets. If we are successful at this, if we demonstrate both the members of Congress, the administration, and the people who are doing the work, if we can demonstrate that we are making improvements in the infrastructure that have the short-term financial impetus that we said it would, then I think that creates more credibility for moving forward and getting additional investments and taking care of that $2.2 trillion infrastructure investment gap that I mentioned earlier. And let me just give you one example. Right now, our economy loses $70 billion a year because we don't move people and goods efficiently, in lost productivity, because we don't move people and goods efficiently in our transportation network. $70 billion a year. It's basically a tax on our economy because people are late to work, they have to leave early because of traffic, because the just-in-time delivery didn't get there just in time, because agricultural products spoil, because the transportation takes longer than expected, they rot in the trucks. We have serious challenges with our infrastructure, and what we need are people to have the political courage to say, this stuff is expensive, but if we don't do this, we are going to have a second-rate economy, and we're going to have to make choices about our standard of living. Do we want to have the quality of life that Americans have enjoyed for the last 50 or 60 years, or are we going to accept something less?
We can now start to take questions from members of our audience here. If you raise your hands, we'll make sure we get a microphone to you. As the microphone comes this way, Kwame Brown, on the issue of job force development and investment in job force development, there is clearly opportunity here, both in this recessionary situation and in this stimulus package, to build a new kind of economy, if you will. And the kind of jobs that you are hoping for, that the District of Columbia will have, the kind of job force development that you are looking for, is long-term job force development. This coincides with an attempt to reform public schools and education in the District of Columbia. What is your own hope about the relationship between school reform and job force development over the long term in the District of Columbia?
Well, school reform, let me go back to for a quick second to say, if in fact the President and the Congress did nothing, more people would be unemployed. We have unfunded pensions liabilities. We have people that are losing their homes in masses. We have small businesses that are going out left and right. I mean, if you see the large companies going under, imagine the mom and pop companies throughout America. Imagine the small businesses right here in the District of Columbia that wouldn't be able to survive and wouldn't be able to continue to keep their employees. I think that as elected officials, it's a book called Leadership on the Line. And at some point, you have to make the decision to get caught up in the bureaucracy of politics is something that is unacceptable to the American people, especially to the residents of the District of Columbia. My hat's off to the Congressman Connolly and all of the people that supported this recovery effort. Now, there's forward to workforce. What does that mean? As you know, there's money to modernize schools throughout the country. There's money to make sure that some of these schools, and especially in urban areas such as the District of Columbia, are in deplorable conditions, where we have put $1 billion and billions of dollars to modernize every single school. It has to be more than just dollars. It has to be an infrastructure that will change the mindset to allow those...
Funny you should mention that. Congressman Connolly and I were having this conversation before this discussion started, and he pointed out that he thought that school infrastructure, school renovation, and school modernization are key to education because that sends a message to our children.
It's key, and it gives them hope. It gives them a sense that we actually care about education in America.
Exactly.
It gives our teachers that are tired of going into these deplorable buildings and taking money out of their pocket to fund some of the basic necessities. It gives them hope. It gives the teachers that have been waiting 20 years and 30 years for someone to actually care about our young folks inside of the school buildings to be energized. And that, in return, will start to affect not only our test scores, but our families. And when our families get affected and get involved, they'll give those young folks an opportunity to graduate with a new hope, not the same over the last 10 to 15 years. People have, maybe you should not look at, you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. People start to not look at different industries. The information technology was an area where people was pushing our young folks towards. Now we have something called the green economy, which is broad. Imagine what we do when we change the mindset of America by teaching our young folks that it's okay to preserve our planet. It's okay to be green. It's okay to think and energy efficient. And for those that do not go to college, because we spend so much money trying to get everyone to school. But for those that don't, there should be an opportunity for them to be educated in a vocational 24-hour facility. It should be an opportunity for them to still be able to participate in where we're trying to go. So the education reform in the District of Columbia, in which this mayor and this council has stood behind, is tough. To throw billions of dollars at a school building, and just because you have a new school building with new windows don't necessarily mean that the young folks will now the test scores will start to come up. But it will send a signal. And I think with this recovery money, for the first time on education, people actually feel that education is important and is at the top of the agenda. And it being stated so in this Recovery Act sends a whole different signal, not only to just here in the District of Columbia, Kojo, but to the areas of the country where sometimes the televisions don't show. The areas that you have some schools that look worse than schools in the District of Columbia in the Midwest. It shows them that Washington actually cares about educating our kids, but educating where you have a green building and understanding that the school is now green, is more energy efficient. Why is it more energy efficient? Because it's more important. We forget about bringing our young folks into the energy and green conversation. This allows that to actually take place.
Okay,
Kojo,
yes,
if I could
please
just
go
add
ahead.
a fact, because Councilman Kwame Brown correctly was talking a little bit earlier about workforce training in the new green economy. And just want to point out that in the stimulus bill for this region, all three jurisdictions, there's about $110 million for precisely that.
Precisely that, and we need to make sure that we use it effectively. And I think that's the key. As you know, the Metropolitan Council of Governments, in which you was, I believe, a former chair of there, have now taken up to see from a regional standpoint, and a lot of these dollars are supposed to be utilized in a regional form so we can maximize the opportunity. And for the first time, we have a subcommittee that's going to look at what do we have in different jurisdictions, so we're not spending the money and duplicating the money trying to do the same thing. If you are over here and you specialize in solar panels, over here specialize in winterization, over here stormwater, we should have a clear understanding from a regional map how we so that folks in the District of Columbia could go somewhere in Montgomery County, somewhere in Montgomery County could come here, but we have a regional approach that brings a comprehensive plan on workforce development.
And I can think of nothing that has fostered this regionalism more than Metro that you mentioned
That's
earlier.
right. That's right.
Here we have a question down front, I think, right here.
Yeah, if you had taken Metro, you would have been on time.
I know. I wanted to park and do that.
Go right ahead, sir.
Okay, well, I guess in line with the theme about making it more efficient to get from point A to B, may I suggest some possibilities for that, like flying over the eastbound lanes of New York Avenue over 395, because to end those horrendous backups on the westbound lanes, for the signal light to turn left onto 395. That's number one. And number two is to retime the signal light at the Suitland Parkway in Firth Sterling, because it sometimes goes several cycles to get through it, because the cycle on Suitland Parkway is shorter compared to First Sterling, and even though the traffic load on First Sterling is lower than Suitland Parkway. Those are just ideas to move people from point A to B a little bit more efficiently than it's going on right now.
Well,
Thank
one of
you.
the interesting things about all of this, Congressman Connolly, is we still have an ongoing debate over highway development versus mass transit development. Where does the Economic Recovery and Investment Act come down in this debate?
Well, you've asked one of my. First of all, I acknowledge the point you're making. More generally, I without addressing the specifics you mentioned, which need to be addressed by state of Maryland, D.C., and so forth. But the need to deploy technology to make us more efficient on the existing infrastructure is woefully inadequate and must be addressed. So there is some money in the stimulus bill to do that, but we in the United States need to make a lot more progress. Many of our competitors in the industrialized world, like Japan, are way ahead of us in the deployment of technology to make people more efficient on existing infrastructure. One of the problems we have, and we addressed it partially in the stimulus bill, but not enough. We have to address it in the reauthorization of the transportation bill, which is coming up hopefully this year. The complete inequality between road money, bridge money, and transit money, and the way the federal government approaches it has to be addressed. Example, for road money, the federal government essentially decides on the size of the pot and then decides what slice you get. So I give Kwame this slice, and then Kwame and the D.C. City Council and the mayor figure out what they want to spend it on and which projects will be funded. That's roads and bridges. Kwame wants to build a transit system like we do in Fairfax, rail to Dulles. Oh no, that's not how it works.
True.
First of all, you need to do a preliminary engineering study, then you need to do a feasibility study, then you need to do an environmental study, then you need to put together a financial feasibility plan, and oh, by the way, I, the federal government, get to approve that. And I may not like it, and I may send it back to you for improvements. And oh, by the way, I, the federal government, arbitrarily decide on the creation of something called a cost effectiveness cap. So meanwhile, by the way, you're noticing this is taking time, and this time is costing money, and so I'm adding cost to the project as the federal government, and I've already set an arbitrary cap beyond which you may not go, and I won't give you any federal money. Such that, let me give you an example, when we built Metro originally in this region, it was with 80% federal money. The capital construction costs were financed by the federal government, 80%. Localities paid the other 20%. Rail to Dulles, a 23.1 mile extension to the nation's capital airport, will have at best 16% federal money. And meanwhile, the federal government, because of that elaborate approval process that took many, many years, added billions of dollars to the cost of the project.
Yeah.
Well,
We have to correct that.
Please go ahead,
I
Steve.
think
And would you raise your hand? Who's the next person in the audience right here? Go ahead, please, Steve.
Congressman, I think you hit the nail on the head. Notice I say that being from the construction industry. But the problem is the pie.
Yeah.
The size of the pie is too small. You have transit traditionally gets 20% of the pie. The problem with the pie is that the funding mechanism for the pie is the federal gas tax. Federal gas tax is 18.3 cents a gallon. The last time it was raised was 1993. So we've gone 16 years without an increase in the federal gas tax. It's lost 40% of its purchasing power. We are not going to be able to address transit, highway needs, with a pie that continues to shrink, and it continues to shrink in some instances because of more fuel-efficient vehicles. And as we get closer to the CAFE standards that the President announced a couple months ago, that's going to have more of an impact on the financial status of the pie because you'll have less and less money going into the Highway Trust Fund. Mm-hmm. So we have got to figure out a way to make that pie bigger, and perhaps the best way to do it is to scrap the gas tax and do something that a lot of people have been talking about, which is a vehicle miles traveled tax, which doesn't matter how fuel efficient your vehicle is. What matters is the mileage that you've ridden on the roads, and that you'll make your contribution based on that.
Steve, I take your point about the need to broaden the pie. I completely agree. And to have a stable source of funding, because the gas tax is not working the way it was originally designed. But I think I'm making a little different point, which is, but even if the pie were bigger, the fundamental inequity of the approach of the federal government in approving roads compared to how they approve transit needs to be addressed. No wonder localities don't want to undertake transit projects. It's too hard, it's too expensive, it's too risky, it takes too long. And why would we want to disincentivize people from doing something that's environmentally friendly and incentivize them to do something that is not?
As well as the cost efficiency. I mean,
That's
at
right.
the end of the day, if in fact you have more layers of bureaucracy, which takes a longer period of time, which costs more money, if we want to be effective and efficient as it relates to getting what's needed and really be serious about mass transit and here and not only in the district and the suburbs, we want to shorten the process. Now we want to have an open and transparent where we can have one study, but I don't know if or two studies or maybe three. I don't know if you need 25 studies. That's the problem I think that we have. So even if the pie was double the size, I would almost guarantee you that the money would not come quicker.
Well, Kwame,
It would be more.
To that point, I just can't resist. The first reference by the federal government to the need to have rail to Dulles was in 1962. We signed the full funding grant agreement this year.
Before I was born, by the way.
Yes.
Before I was born, and we're still waiting for it.
47 years later, that's called warp time in federal speak.
We have a question here.
Staying on this topic, actually, I definitely agree with the congressman regarding the importance of allocation of mass transit versus roads and highways. I think that, in particular, if you invest more in mass transit, that you will need simply less money for highways because there will be less need for cars on the road, and that sort of promotes the kind of sort of objectives and values that we're talking about today in terms of the green economy, et cetera. But sort of to push you a little bit further on sort of what I thought Kwame's initial question was to you, sort of these shovel-ready projects are going to be roads and highways stuff, because that's what people, or a lot of them, are going to be. So, but high-speed rail, sort of a lot of these exciting mass transit projects are going to take a lot longer to sort of do. What is it in the legislation that's going to guarantee that actually when, sort of, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, when the economy is humming along, Republicans are talking about cutting the deficit, that they can't somehow basically nix these projects, or is there simply no way to get around that?
Well, there is a sort of point of no return when you get involved in a large capital project. There is money in the stimulus, as I said, $8 billion of additional transit funding over and above, as Steve said, what's in current law in appropriations and or in the transportation
Plus
bill.
another $7 billion for high-speed rail.
Exactly, plus another $7 billion for high-speed rail. In my state of Virginia, for example, tonight we're tabulating primary results for governor. All three candidates for governor on our side, we're talking about high-speed rail from Richmond to Washington and from some other parts of the state from Virginia Beach to Richmond. So they're already talking that way. Now, is that as shovel-ready, frankly, as building another lane in a highway? No. But it does have the multiplier effect that I talked about earlier in terms of what that means by way of an investment and what the magnet it serves to attract lots of other kinds of investment is almost incalculable and enormously beneficial to the economy, not only today, but long term. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
We have a question.
Roads, too.
Right in front.
Sure. Mr. Connolly, just one question. I believe that our our land use and parking requirements, our zoning requirements, that I believe that this model of land use development requires a great deal from the transportation sector, and that it requires people to move, and by separating land uses and by spreading land uses out. Is there any thought been given to, perhaps at the federal level, encouraging locals to plan for growth in a way that puts lower demands on the transportation infrastructure? For example, a more connective street system, whereby when you add a new development, you're also adding to the transportation capacity. Or, for example, encouragement or discouragement from adding employee parking and so forth, which tends to spread land uses out and create a transit unfriendly environment.
Great question. And I guess I'd say to you, generally, yes, there are ways the federal government can encourage that. Now, we have to be careful that we're not opposing unfunded mandates. We have to be careful that we're not substituting ourselves for local land use decisions. Kwame Brown knows better than some federal agency what's best for his land use in D.C. And for the 14 years I was on the Board of Supervisors, I'd like to believe I knew better in Fairfax than somebody in some federal agency or somewhere else. Having said that, I'm advocating right now that in the new Chesapeake Bay bill for the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is 64,000 square miles, 6 states, including D.C., we would have a uniform federal standard for what's called low-impact development. If we could do that, we could encourage governments to do the kind of smart growth you were talking about and not be penalized for it, and to rein in sprawl and to take advantage of transit nodes with higher-end mixed-use density. Now, that's not always popular if you live near it, but we have lots of models. It certainly worked with Metro here in Washington. I was talking earlier about the transformative effect of Metro. One of them is in the patterns of growth and development. Very positive for the region. Arlington's a great example that was able to incorporate significantly higher densities without negatively impacting congestion or air quality. They made it work. They quadrupled their density and stayed the same in terms of traffic patterns. They didn't quadruple congestion or traffic. So it works. And so doing a lot more of that, I think, absolutely is to be encouraged, and we may want to incentivize localities that if you are going to qualify for this transit money, we'd like to see some changes in your land use patterns that get at the density required for the ridership, but also, more importantly, environmentally help reduce your carbon footprint.
You know, in a lot of ways here we're talking about cultural shifts, both at the national level and at the local level. Kwame Brown, when you talk about preparing adults, people who have not gone to college, people who may not have graduated high school, but who are in the workforce, many of them unemployed in the District of Columbia, you're talking about retraining those people so that they are better prepared to participate in an energy-efficient, green economy. That requires a certain cultural mind shift in Washington, D.C., does it not?
Oh, no, it absolutely does. And, of course, what happens in Washington affects the region. But let me say that we have, with 10% unemployment and 33% in some particular wards in the city, we have people that can read, write, add, and subtract, people that may have been working in the financial area that now are unemployed, people that are making very little money and with a little education could now be part of a new economy that's on the rise. We have Cardoza Construction Academy that has a facility that is teaching our young folks how to get prepared for the workforce. We have the Phelps Architect, Engineering, and Construction High School that has more green in it than any other high school facility in the region. And then we have a hospitality high school, which you've read about in the Washington Post. So the movement was not to look to how do we build another building. And I think the congressman can understand that. It takes a long time to build a new school. How do we use the resources at these schools to keep them open 24 hours? Nights, weekends, and the summer, so that people that are 18 to 45 years old will have an opportunity to now be able to participate and become either better employed or become employed or to have exposure to the next generation of workforce opportunities that will take place. We're going to wake up 5 years from now and ask the question, how did we not jump in front of this train? How did we not create an infrastructure for the construction companies that are looking for the workforce? Right now, if you ask most companies, they would say we got to find trained workers. But then there's no real infrastructure to train the workers so they can have an opportunity to work for local businesses. And I think the construction industry is a perfect example of that. There are not enough jobs for the opportunities that exist. What we have failed to do as elected leaders is create the infrastructure to help create the jobs, which then will then bring down the social cost that we're paying in the city alone and bring down those family environment to be able to put more tax rolls on the city.
Steve, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I want to spray some perfume on the councilman for what he's done on the on providing opportunities for students to leave school and find work. Only 30% of the jobs in this country require a college degree. And I think that one of the failings of our educational system is not focusing on how to help those kids that, for whatever reason, aren't going to be successful in college. And they're smart kids, but they learn differently, and they may not have the patience for higher education. And what you've done with the construction school, the Phelps School, and with the hospitality school, I think provides great opportunities for these kids. There are a lot of my members that are running $50 million a year operations that started out as carpenters and laborers and learned how to run a construction site, moved up the ladder to the point where they went out and they took the risk of starting their own construction company, and they're very successful today. And you're going to provide those opportunities for those kids.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Steve.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for
Good
this
evening.
very interesting panel. And Councilmember Brown, thank you for representing the district so well in this discussion. My name is Stella Tarnay, and I'm with the District Department of the Environment. And about 60 million of the stimulus funds will be coming through my agency. And I thought it would be interesting to share a little bit about some of the specifics of how that money I'm seeing is supporting the green economy. Because there's some very, very specific and interesting opportunities that are evolving. Of that 60 million, for example, 24 to 32 million is going to go for public buildings and the greening of the public buildings. And that includes weatherization of schools. And also we've been able to manage with some of the administrative money to hire, or we're about to look to hire, 6 energy managers for the district. 2 will go to schools, 2 will go to the Office of Property Management, and 2 will go to my agency, so that we can take a much more strategic look at saving energy in district buildings. And with a bill of $100 million for energy each year in district agencies, if we can think a little more smartly about how to weatherize our buildings, we could save $20, $30 million a year. And kind of on the human side of things, there are many opportunities that are emerging through our energy office, where we'll be able to expand our weatherization and energy audit program for low-income families literally 20-fold as a result of the stimulus money. And Van Jones has this wonderful way of talking about the humble energy dollar and how it's recycled through the economy. And when that money goes toward weatherization of a low-income home, that saves money for the family, that gives new jobs to possibly a low-income person in that neighborhood, and then is recycled through the neighborhood probably as spent money. So that's very exciting. And one more piece that I think is just typical of the kinds of small but very important opportunities that are emerging. On Friday, I'll be taking a tour of Oak Hill, which is the former correctional facility for youth, and I'll be walking through their staff in my capacity as the Green Building Coordinator for the district, and we'll be taking a look at how we can weatherize their old residences and how we can use those as training opportunities for the youth that are associated with that facility, so that they can look forward to brighter and greener jobs in the future. Great. So from my vantage point, it's a really exciting time and very specific opportunities for the green economy.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Stella, if I may, Kojo, I love what you just said. It's a great story, and it underscores what we're trying to do with the stimulus. If I heard you correctly, you're hiring new people. If I heard you correctly, this isn't a sunk cost like a consumable. Your investment in weatherizing public buildings will yield savings, if I heard you correctly, just an operating cost of $20 to $30 million a year. That will be the gift that keeps on giving, by the way. That's not on savings. So it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. And oh, by the way, you get a better building and a retrofit building and so forth. So the investments, that initial investment really has a payoff for the District of Columbia and for the economy. Multiply that many times by other jurisdictions, and what you're describing is exactly what we hoped it would do.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We have another question or comment here. Go right ahead, please.
Okay, my name is Wendy Jia. I work with Metro right next door, so it's a great session for me to come here, just walk across the street. I want to thank Congressman Connolly for recognizing the importance of investing in public transit system, and particularly noting the importance of Metro in this region in serving the greater mobility needs here. And thanks for the stimulus funding, we are able to get, I think, above $200 million in this year to really serve the immediate capital needs, really to maintain the facility, to keep in a good condition so we can better serve our customers. My question is, well, beyond this year, we have great capital needs, which is already published on our website from our capital study inventory, billions of needs. When will we see the dedicated transit funding for Metro in this region? I know the Tom Davis bill proposed $1.5 billion for 10 years with the region's commitment, Maryland, Virginia, and DC. That will only last for 10 years. What's going to be beyond? What's the thinking to support and to modernize America's transit system beyond the short-term stimulus funding?
A dedicated funding stream for Metro.
Well, when I was elected chairman of Fairfax, and as Kwame mentioned, I'd been chairman of the Council of Governments, so I'm a long-time regional player. I asked for a blue ribbon panel not to study dedicated funding, but to look at all the existing studies and give us the best recommendation for how to do it. And shortly thereafter, as you mentioned, Congressman Davis, my predecessor, introduced a bill following up on that that said, all right, if the 3 localities put up $150 million a year for 10 years, we'll match it at the federal level for a total of $300 million a year, $3 billion total, dedicated funding for Metro for capital. And lo and behold, I don't know whether he thought we'd call his bluff or what, but the 3 jurisdictions managed, in fact, to do just that. Just recently, the District of Columbia finalized the compact amendment to allow us to do this. And there are strings attached. The federal government gets to appoint 2 representatives to the board of Metro. But Maryland, Virginia, and DC have identified and committed their $50 million each. So now it's time for the federal government to step up. And we're going to be talking both to, unfortunately, that $150 million matching funds were not included in President Obama's revised budget. So we need to be talking with the administration. We need to be looking at the transportation reauthorization bill. But we are going to fight for and succeed in identifying $150 million. However, having said all of that, just a parenthetical note, our metro system has the highest fare box recovery rate of any metro system in the United States. And our metro system is virtually the only major urban system without a dedicated funding source. Sure. And that makes it very hard for us to maintain the capital investments we need to make to add capacity to a system that's bursting at the seams. So that long term has to be addressed, as you said, beyond the 10-year time horizon.
Well, can we do a straw poll here? How many people in the audience, by show of hands, would be willing to pay a higher gas tax to get more money for transit? Almost universal. See, you can spend a gas tax and get reelected.
We have another question in the rear.
And I think this will be the last question. My name is Basil Alexander. I'm with O'Connor Construction Management. This might sound a bit crazy in the current economy, but there's been a lot of talk in the papers recently about how the stimulus funding might, especially since it's aimed at in such a short time frame, actually lead to escalation or an increase in costs for everyday objects, and of course, especially for construction commodities. If I could direct my question at Steve, just looking at the smaller picture, even among the AGC membership, I don't know what percentage, whether it's a third or a half of your members, aren't very much, in my opinion, tooled to do either government projects or, of course, at the larger level, federal projects. It's not like any general contractor can bid on a school project if they don't have school history. And obviously at the federal level, it's even more exclusive. So the point being that there's a finite number of companies bidding on a small number of projects that are coming to bid in a very, very short time frame for the construction sector. How are we going to prevent the costs of construction and the costs generally throughout the economy from escalating unnaturally over the next 2 years?
Well, first of all, because of the state of the industry right now and the state of the economy, now, if you are an owner, whether a public or private owner, now's a great time to build.
Yes.
Because prices are down. Material prices because of reduction in worldwide demand for steel, for cement, for PVC pipe, for any component that goes into a construction project. Those products are significantly lower as commodities than they were a year ago. To your concern about the free-for-all for the projects, there's pre-qualification that goes on before you can bid on a federal project. You have to be bonded. You have to demonstrate that you meet the qualifications that are in the specs, that you have the requisite experience. The other reason that you're going to see prices go down is that there's a lot more competition for these projects. A year ago, contractors were telling me they were turning work down because they had too much backlog. Now they're scrambling for it. And the marketplace will determine and provide safeguards already to make sure that you're going to have qualified contractors that are going to be the low bidder on these projects. Because for the folks that aren't ready, it's only going to take them one bad job to go away. They'll go out of business. And one other point I'd make about this is that what I hear from a lot of government agencies around the country that are spending stimulus money on projects is that the bids are coming in below the engineer's estimates, which means after the project is awarded to the successful bidder, that agency has additional money to spend on construction.
And I guess a number of construction companies, and I'll use school modernization in the District of Columbia because we're spending a lot of money there. They see more construction companies bidding on smaller jobs than they've ever seen before. Everyone's bidding. I mean, and we did build something called the baseball stadium they built, and then the cost of cement was so high.
Right.
I mean, I guess if we were the way to build it now, we probably got a reduction of 20–30% just in the cost of the stadium alone, which shows that the costs are going down. But I think you asked a question that was a very appropriate one as it relates to the bidding process, because it does become tighter and tighter in a market that we currently see, whether it's federal work, whether it's local government work, whether it's municipality work. The question becomes, I think the cost question has been answered. The question becomes now is how does everyone get a fair share at the table when the table becomes somewhat smaller?
Again, I'm sorry, Congressman, but again, material prices a year ago, the inflation rate for construction material prices was double digit. Yes. Now it's gone the other way.
Yes. I was just going to echo what you said. Just a few years ago, I can just tell you on public bidding, we had trouble getting multiple bids sometimes because business was, they could pick and choose what they wanted to bid on. And secondly, consistently, the bids were coming in way above, I'd say 20 or 30%, sometimes above our initial estimate of the cost of construction, making forcing us to be very selective in local government, what we could finance, what we couldn't. Today, it's the opposite. Everything's coming in way below our original estimate freeing up capital for other projects and to sometimes augment and enhance the project at hand. And as Kwame said, because they're hungry. Even smaller projects that wouldn't have gotten some of the bids they get today because of that. The other part of your question is, well, on the other hand, there are lots of companies that I'm sure are your members that are ready to go on various and sundry capital projects. Clark Construction is very comfortable with public-private partnerships and bidding, including on school projects, for example. Bechtel, is helping to build rail to Dulles. Floor Daniel is helping to build hot lines in the Beltway and proposing to do the same in the I-95. So we've got a lot of experience of larger companies, certainly quite comfortable in public sector projects or in public-private partnerships with the public sector to build large capital projects.
And if your concern is that somebody who was a home builder last week is going to build a federal courthouse next week, it's not going to happen because they don't have the bonding capacity to be able to do it.
Yeah, they also don't have the qualifications.
I'm afraid that's about all the time we have. I'd like to thank you all for being here. A special thank you to our Congressman Gerald Conolly, Democrat of Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Washington, D.C. at-large Councilmember Kwame Brown. And Steve Sandherr, CEO of the Associated General Contractors of America.
Good job.
Thank you, too. Appreciate it.
Again, thank you all for being here. Hopefully, we have all benefited from this conversation this evening. I know I have. I hope you have also. Thank you, and please get home safely. Good night.
Thank you.